All right, friends, we have arrived. Saturn in the sign of Aries. Saturn made its ingress on February 13th, and it will be staying there for the next 2 years. Saturn has officially crossed that decisive threshold from a dual sign of Pisces to the cardinal sign of Aries. And Aries in itself is where movement begins. It's the point where existence itself asserts itself through action. Saturn, on the other hand, is the principle that governs time, limitations, endurance, and consequences. Saturn induces repetition and then determines what can survive that repetition. When Saturn enters Aries, action becomes exposed to time. Every act of will is placed inside a field of consequence that continues long after the initial impulse that created it. So this transit is bringing our attention to how actions are being initiated. It's going to make us notice how we spend our energy, where we spend it, and how we're able to sustain ourselves and our effort through time. What's being initiated here now by Saturn, because Saturn represents hardship, it's going to bring certain hardships. But at the end of it, it's going to show us our capacity, and it's going to start its lessons in the same way. And I want us to know that this is going to be ongoing until April 13th of 2028. So we have a little bit over 2 years. And before getting into the depth of this video, there will be plenty of videos coming up about Saturn. Saturn's going to make that exact conjunction with Neptune. Pretty soon we have Sun and Saturn conjunct. So this will be ongoing. And there's now a playlist on the channel if you guys want to go and understand what is the signature about. And if you want to catch the future videos as well as the upcoming articles on my website, please remember to subscribe so YouTube sends you notifications. Now, without further ado, let's get to the depth of this video. I'm going to go through the video as usual, layer by layer, and then I'm going to conclude with the shadows and the lessons of this placement. So Aries in itself, as I mentioned earlier, represents the moment when existence itself gets expressed. The potential becomes manifest. So the sign of Aries has a lot to do with ignition. It's the commandment to exist. It's the act where potential asserts itself into being. So the sign of Aries is the principle of emergence of the self. Something individuated comes into being. It's a mechanism of initiation where existence itself can declare itself as something active. And when we come into this world, when we say we have agency or we have a will, we're talking about the same idea. There's enough force in Aries that can convert latent potential as expressed potential, which then becomes its manifest form. So in the sign of Aries, action is not optional. It's the means where existence itself exists, is how we exist. Imagine us not acting. Even when we talk about non-action, we still have to act on those most basic fundamental levels to survive. Now, let's take Saturn on the other hand. We can look at Saturn as the thing that regulates the structure of existence itself. That's because Saturn regulates limits. It's determining how much something can persist and live, because Saturn is related to decay and death. So Saturn's telling us you're only allowed to maintain this form that has become manifest for a certain amount of time. And Saturn represents time. Saturn decides when decay begins. And on top of that, Saturn represents pressure. That limiting factor is just keep pushing everything together. It's making things smaller, more confined, more restrictive. It's the editing process. So it's creating a constraint. That's where the pressure is coming from. It defines the boundaries around things. It's the last planet, visible planet. So it's describing the boundary of our solar system, how far even our sight can see, because our natural sight can't see past Saturn. So Saturn's determining conditions where excess cannot happen within a system, within a structure. And it does this because it knows excess destabilizes the system. So that editing process is for making things actually efficient and concise. That's why there's a sense of practicality to Saturn. So when we have Saturn coming into the sign of Aries, as you can see, we have this thing that wants to initiate, explode outwards and forward, while Saturn's standing on the edge of it is like, nope, restriction, restriction, restriction. It's coming in against that initiation and forward movement. So we're going to see right at the beginning, we've got Clash of the Titans here. So here, ignition and emergence of Aries has to start encountering regulation and containment. And that means Saturn's coming in to meet existence at the point of its assertion. Existence, like, I want to come into my existing form. And then here is Saturn, engaging motion right when it's about to begin. So there's constriction being applied to emergence. So think about this in terms of our action. I just want you to keep these imageries in your mind. You want to act, you want to initiate, Saturn's like a wall here, boom. Right away, you have to answer to Saturn. Now, if Saturn was so powerful, we got to remember it's debilitated. But if it wasn't in the sign of Aries, Saturn would have the power to reshape the structure of the sign of Aries in some ways. But Saturn can't do that. Saturn doesn't have power. It's debilitated here. So all that it can do is constantly and perpetually test the integrity of new beginnings. Saturn's going to stand there like a wall. That's a wall that's animated, I can push back, because it wants to test everything that we initiate to see if it can tolerate its resistance and its pushback. For this reason, every time we come to act in the sign of Aries, pressure is immediately felt. Time enters into the moment of action itself. And so this can create time distortion. You know, when you're getting into an accident, because there's so much happening, there's so much intensity, the brain is processing so much, the frame of time changes and time actually slows. Like when you think back, you could feel your body going from your back, going just forward 6 inches, that whiplash. So the frame of time can change in Aries too, which really affects our perception of what kind of experience we're having. In general, anything that gets initiated, Saturn's going to test it, even though it's debilitated. And again, that's because Saturn's going to push back against every forward propulsion. So another way of translating this, Saturn's going to create situations that it wants to know, is your action strong enough, genuine enough, directed enough, that it can withstand or surpass the resistance that I'm creating? So one of the things that we'll notice right off the bat, that we don't have the luxury of just exerting ourselves and making effort towards different things. Effort in itself becomes a limited resource. And that means we have to become very methodical and measured in how we exert energy. For instance, one of the things that we'll notice, action's going to require more sustained output to produce the same result that we used to produce. The tasks that we usually do just require way more engagement. They take more time. And what happens when we get these kinds of situations, our momentum starts to break. And that means we have to deliberately manage our energy and how we move in the world. And we have to remember, every time we initiate an action with Saturn here, we have to have our intentions set strongly, because movement's always being initiated under some sort of a constraint. There's a condition on it. And that means we can't rely on that powerful, forceful burst that's naturally in the sign of Aries. It's like you'll get shot out and boom, right away you hit your head against the wall. That's why in other videos I was saying Saturn creates false ignition in the sign of Aries. Like on a physical level, we'll experience this in a very basic, tangible way. Like you used to go to the gym, you had 3 leg days, for example, and you could recover in between them to go back and to do the next set of workout. But you'll see that your recovery time needs more time. It becomes slower. Like everything is demanding more time, which means we're putting in more efforts. That means there's expenditure of more energy. This is why we need to become mindful of what we're acting towards, not to be random, not to overextend ourselves, make ourselves over available. Because what this is going to do is going to mentally and physically exhaust us. But because this is going to be going on for 2 years, we're going to face these kinds of situations, but these are signals. This is why I say it's lessons of Saturn. Like an example of lesson coming from Saturn here is, you can't have prolonged expenditure of energy without restoration. This is an art in itself, to know when we can work, when we need to rest, so we have this time to recuperate, to come back. Like if we don't understand the art of this sequence and process, Saturn is going to teach us. Saturn wants us to understand where our limit is and what the cost of surpassing that limit is without proper conditioning. And this is a beautiful lesson, because as time goes by in our life and as we mature, we understand the finitude of time, the finitude of energy, resources. The sooner that we can learn this lesson, the better we can pace ourselves and actually have a more productive life. More productive life doesn't mean more work. It's about knowing how to be efficient. Like sustained effort without pacing always leads to tension, and that tension can become so tight that things eventually break. So Saturn's going to take us to the brink of these breaks, but it's up to us to learn to how to work with it, to know how to relieve the pressure at some point through rest, not to act. And I'm bringing the examples of the body because what do we use in this world to enact ourselves and to be in the world and to engage with it? Our body is always at the front line of everything. We're initiating and we're acting. We're using its resources, its energy. So one of the most important things while Saturn's in the sign of Aries is for us to understand what it means to have somatic regulation, like the rhythm of sleep, activity, rest, recuperation. These factors become super important on a very practical level because without attention to it, our output will decrease dramatically in the next 2 years. Like we can't resort to just make an effort to resolve something quickly. And because we can't do it, the mind starts to experience a lot of pressure. So the body's starting to feel the fatigue. And look how much that asks of us from our psychology, because motivation has to keep on persisting and persisting while we're getting no outcome. And we know motivation is not something that just sustains itself 24 hours a day. It has spikes. So it becomes too demanding for the mind, for our psychology. And the inability to perform the way we expect ourselves to or the way that we have been, this can come to tremendously affect our sense of self-confidence because a lot of times we judge ourselves based on what we can do. Some people even attach their identity to what it is that they do. So in a lot of ways, Saturn is coming into the sign of Aries to test all of these factors. Do you do what you do because that's what you're made of? Or do you do what you do because that gives you a status in the world? And that's become part of your identity. But I'll get more into the depth of this shortly. In general, this transit is coming into place to heighten our awareness about our limitations. And that's because Saturn represents the limits. Aries is very much related to your individual self. So it's trying to show you the limit of that. Another thing I want you to take note of that's going to be a prominent feeling while Saturn's in Aries, because we can't perform as many tasks as we want, do everything that we want. And the mind has this habit of constantly focusing on what it hasn't done. Our mind can constantly linger on the tasks that are unfinished to feel like we're falling behind. So then every decision and every moment of rest by itself is going to weigh on you. This also puts a lot of pressure on our psychology. And what our mind wants to do is to constantly overcompensate. But we'll come to see that, oh my God, I have to delay action. I have to delay gratification. So if you think about it, our willpower is being tested by Saturn. But Saturn's trying to teach us something that can actually increase our willpower if we learn it. And that's the art of pacing. Because just like motivation and determination, willpower has its own spikes throughout the day. It's not something you can take to its height and consistently keep it there. But if you know how to pace yourself, you stay at a level where you don't even need to employ your willpower in such a forceful and aggressive way. That's the way to finish the task, slow and steady. That's the ultimate lesson, which is so hard to do in the sign of Aries because everything's just a short, quick burst. And one of the components in learning how to pace ourselves is to understand what it means to be flexible because it comes with a lot of trials and errors. But when we don't want to pace ourselves and we just want to employ that willpower, we constantly have to narrow our focus, which naturally brings a decrease in flexibility because now intentionality is coming into the picture. It has a focal point. It has a bullseye. And with Saturn here not allowing us to freely move, we're talking about constant, perpetual frustration because we can't exert our will. We can't get the outcomes that we want in the time frame that we want, which actually makes the sign of Aries even more impatient than it naturally is. And Saturn is just going to augment this because Saturn just wants patience from you, wants slowness from you. With Saturn there, resolution is going to unfold very slowly. So there's going to be a discrepancy here, right? Your mind's looking for closure and circumstances are keep telling you to continue. Like this is something that you can't merge them together. So these are the lessons when I say pacing, we're trying to learn through all of these tension points. Like one of the lessons here by the end of Saturn's transit is how do we tolerate uncertainty when uncertainty is being stretched and our effort, we just feel impotent. We can't resolve it. So we have to live with this. We have to pace ourselves through it. And one of the things I want to emphasize again, like having self-judgments becomes a very prominent theme. Like this can become a depressing time for people. Yes, because of that self-confidence, but also because there's this constant self-evaluation that's negative. Saturn represents negativity because we keep trying and it feels like we keep failing. So our self-talk internally can very much change. So there's psychological pressure, there's physical pressure, and both of them will just keep increasing because we're constantly engaging to arrive somewhere, but there's no release, there's no arrival. So that's why, again, I'm talking about the art of pacing, because what we need here is recalibration, not just escalation through more action, more self-judgments. Those things are not going to solve it with Saturn here. But I want to talk about the positive note of all of this. And that's because Saturn's conditioning us. And because Saturn's here for such a long time, we can build new habits. We can learn the art of pace. We can understand our limits and set realistic goals, for instance. This is so important for achieving our goals. Because if you don't know your limit, you set goals that are unattainable. So you just make effort, but you fail every week. So that ultimate goal remains very elusive. This is a gift that Saturn's giving us. It's like, you know what? You can condition yourself to have greater output, greater capacity for work, but you got to understand where you're starting at. Saturn is helping us restructure how we apply our efforts. That means the way that we work will become more deliberate. Our actions become selective. This is preservation of time, energy, resources, everything that's valuable to us. And we'll come to see that because of the editing process that Saturn's bringing into our life, we become more concise. Like for a smaller output, we get greater gains. So Saturn's really teaching us how to preserve our energy. And for me, I'm a firm believer that you come into this world as a finite potential. That means you have a certain amount of energy. If you want to burn the candle from both ends of the stick, both the quantity and quality of life will decrease dramatically. Saturn is about longevity. Saturn's actually showing us right now, look, this is who you are and what you are as a being. You're this finite thing. Know how to pace yourself, balance your resources, conserve them rather than constantly burning it off. So it's preserving energy rather than just burning it indiscriminately. And we have to remember Saturn is super stingy. So that's what it's asking of us when it's coming to our energy and our effort. And Saturn's bringing impossibility into the sign of Aries, which is endurance. We're learning how to pause, for crying out loud, in the sign of Aries, which is so difficult. But I said this in the last video too, when I was talking about Saturn at the end of Pisces at that 29-degree mark. Sometimes our saving grace in this life is inaction. So Saturn's trying to teach us that timing. And Saturn in Aries can actually create a kind of a recklessness at the beginning because we want to bypass this, but Saturn's creating this environment where we cannot. So we can become more accident prone. But in general, Saturn, by allowing us to pause in the sign of Aries, is giving us a particular wisdom. It's a particular kind of endurance. Like we're learning how to redo things after when we fail. We're learning how to hold things. We're starting to know how we can do more with less. And Saturn's going to teach us this because every time we act and is not aligned, there's some sort of a consequence for it. Saturn's going to show us how every action, no matter how small, every effort has a cost. And I want us to keep in mind, if we pull this off, and we will pull it off, of course we will pull it off, Saturn's giving Aries something that is much appreciated in this sign, which is strength. Like again, I've said this in other videos, this is the concept of what doesn't kill me, make me stronger. So we're going to be constantly tested. Our self-confidence, our sense of self, our actions, everything's going to go through this grinder. But if we're standing and if we have learned, we have come out of the other end a lot stronger. But this is all contingent on whether if we can learn these lessons or not. So that's why I want to talk about some of the shadows that can come through the process of learning or if we don't learn these lessons. So let's talk about the shadows. And a lot of the shadows of Saturn and Aries comes from us not understanding how to react or act to the constraints that are placed on us. Is about compulsive assertion. And that's when actions being used as a defense against discomfort. And it's going to be uncomfortable to have Saturn there. So just imagine how reactive the person can become. This is almost like a person who's running from wanting to confront their own limitations. They're fighting against it. So here, activity replaces reflection. We'll just keep continuing to act just to have a sense of our own agency, even though we're digging a big hole for ourselves. The shadow here makes us feel like stillness or that pause that Saturn's asking for is about losing control over the self. And that's because the psyche here is equating a pause with a loss of control. Constraints here are being internalized as a threat rather than information. So the response of a person here is to just escalate rather than adjust, rather than be like, all right, how can I do this differently? They'll just keep pushing until they bring everything to the brinks of its breakdown. Another shadow here that can be created with this placement, we can get a lot of internalized hostility. And that's because Saturn is preventing that outward propulsion and movement. So pressure here can't be discharged outwardly. And the psyche still needs to metabolize this. So what does it do? It just internalizes it and it becomes self-inflicted. Like mistakes will be interpreted as personal and self-deficiencies. If someone, let's say, procrastinates for a moment or they just feel like they can't engage, they feel sick on that day, they're like, I'm betraying myself. It's just over the top. Self-punishing. So the inner authority of the self is becoming self-punitive. And if you go a little bit deeper here, this is an individual who has problems with authority anyway. It's like unresolved relationship with authority, even the authority of the self. So the psyche is trying to enforce order through Saturn's criticism. So discipline just collapses into self-punishment. Like if you think about this shadow of this placement, this is makes you lose your breath. You know, when you see people who have that self-talk that is so negative, like it's a sure way to destroy our own self-confidence. But let's go to the next shadow. And I like to call this defiant exhaustion. Like sometimes we see in life, we've tried, we failed, but we just don't want to tap and submit. We'll just keep on exerting more energy as if there's a way out of this by doing more work. And this is Saturn's function where it's related to endurance rather than becoming something functional in the sign of Aries, like the art of pacing is just becoming something performative. And beneath all of this, when you go into the psyche, this is a person where they see suffering as something that gives them legitimacy because they're literally suffering. Like submit, end it, it's done. And you can start something else. You can retry from the beginning and actually have a different feeling. But there's this sense that I'm just going to keep going, even if I suffer through it. The suffering itself is giving me authority. And here, there could also be a component that I have to make an effort to have a sense of self-worth. Like rest is perceived as weakness. These are the people who say you don't need sleep until you die. But why? Why can't you rest and have an enjoyable life? This is a shadow expression that's coming out of somewhere else, out of the subconscious. This shadow is telling us something about the distortion of our value systems too. That's because worth is connected to strength rather than having a sense of coherence. And we have to understand Saturn's a malefic and it loves augmenting these kinds of modes, but only for us to realize it. That's the only way to resolve it. On the other hand, another shadow of this placement is premature disengagement. This is when resistance just becomes too overwhelming. So the person's like, I submit, even though they shouldn't. You're quitting too early. This has a lot to do with the subconscious material to withdraw from things. I don't want to deal with the confrontation. I don't want to deal with the consequences, so I just won't act. And it's important to remember this shadow actually has nothing to do with rest. It's about retreat. It's about feeling discouraged. This is the mind wanting to take momentum and dissolve it into inertia because inertia and inactivity feel safe. That's not the point of Aries. When I say we should pause sometimes in the sign of Aries, as hard as it is, it's not about falling into inertia, because rest assured, in the sign of Aries, that is going to turn into depression. It's not about disengagement, because we're supposed to problem solve in the sign of Aries, but this modality is the psyche interpreting difficulty as something impossible. And this is so dangerous because we can lose meaning. Everything becomes pointless. And when things become pointless, future contracts. There's no point to live. That's why I'm saying it can bring on a sense of depression. It's very important to remain vigilant about this shadow aspect if it comes up. Saturn in Aries can be very synonymous with sadness, depression, hopelessness. Because what do we do when we are in a moment of crisis? A lot of times we need to act to get ourselves out of it. But if everything's pointless, it's just doom and gloom. And if we just take all of these shadows that I just talked about and look at their common source, we'll see a bigger pattern at play. The puppeteer pulling all the strings on these shadows. And that is the person's problem with integrating their limitation into their identity in a productive way. They don't want to engage with their limits. So they're either fighting it or they're completely disengaging from it. And the point in life is to constantly be engaged with our limitations, to have a sense of humility that we do have these limitations. But the point of life is not to stop there and then to just fall on our knees. We got to learn how to consistently push just enough, a little bit, a little bit. And over the years, we've made strides. And we have to realize for us human beings, when we don't metabolize our limits, we get into endless battles of resistance. And this is resistance with ourselves and with other people. And think about it, a lot of times we resist other human beings as well as resisting ourselves is because we don't want to see their limitation. Because if we see other people's limitations, we can accept them as who they are, draw very strong boundaries that certain things will not cross because they can't meet you where you are or you can't meet them where they are. There has to be some limits in place for that interaction. And in reality, if we can't see our own limits or the limits of other people and we pretend that they don't exist, we live in a complete distortion of reality. And the shadows are also saying that, hey, if you don't want to see these limits, this is saying something about the shadow of Aries, which has to do with courage. You don't actually have the courage to see yourself, other people, your environment, the courage to see things honestly. It's also showing the rigidity that exists within us. It's telling us something about our lack of adaptability and fluidity. Because the minute we see our limits, we're forced to adjust our action, how we act, how we react, what we engage with, where we expend our energy. All of it comes into our viewpoint. And encountering these shadows, or anytime we're grappling with our shadow, the point is refinement. And in the sign of Aries with Saturn there, we're going to get to see how we employ force to align rather than having this art of pace that allows things to accumulate, allows us to act, where our sense of power emerges naturally. A lot of time, power has to be about how you position yourself in your life and the world. But that act of positioning is contingent on how you can act. And when you act naturally, you're naturally positioned, and then there's a demonstration of your own power to yourself. The shadows are just showing us where the intelligence of effort has been lost. It's just been a brute person in a sense. Sometimes you just can't act your way out of life, and Saturn's going to show us this. So having Saturn here for such a long time is an opportunity for us to see, to engage, and to grapple with these shadows. Once when we see them, that's when we know how to integrate them. We can consciously recalibrate them. And to have recalibration in the sign of Aries, it means turning compulsion into conscious measured choice. We go from self-punishment to self-regulation. We go from an undisciplined mind and body to a disciplined mind and body. From impatience to act to intelligently acting, and from withdrawal to selective persistence. So the shadows that are being created here is actually showing us discernment about what it means to be in the sign of Aries. It's demanding differentiation between effort that sustains and effort that actually erodes things in our lives. Saturn is forcing our psyche to develop a mature relationship with pressure, with limitations, with exertion of energy. It's given us a particular kind of maturity that is very important in life. But if we don't incorporate these shadows, that's what I was saying earlier, the misfiring that is created here, you become accident prone. Burnouts become inevitable. Our confidence just gets deteriorated very quietly, even if it's not overtly in the background, is dissolving. And ultimately, all of this adds up to having a lack of agency in our life. And that is not a good state to be in. And I keep emphasizing on the shadows here right now because it's going to come up for all of us in one way or another, because these are the unresolved things that's burning us out, where we're not acting in the right sphere of life, at the right pace, at the right time. So we're supposed to learn certain things. And the cost of this can be too high because the bodies keep absorbing all of this, because the body has to put itself out there to do many actions. And not to mention the psychological burnout, which fragments our motivation, our determination, zest for life. And then our sense of direction becomes very distorted. Things become inconsistent. Things can get out of control with this debilitation. And we've got to remember, unintegrated shadows is not just like Saturn's in the sign of Aries, so it's just time for these shadows. No, if they exist in you, they are always in there and they're going to repeat themselves. And it's better to resolve them now than to wait another 28.5 years to meet them again, but more forcefully because they've been fed and they're even stronger then. And we got to remember, Saturn's not going to do any of this work for us. It's just going to create hardship so that we see certain things. The work is for us. It's up to us to remove these patterns, to modify them. Saturn's just exposing them. And the way it's going to expose them is through repetition over and over again. So we have many opportunities. And hopefully awareness develops with each repetition. And that becomes the art of pacing in itself, that, okay, I know this is a trend in my life now. It's going to come up again next week. I'm going to deal with it very consciously with a lot of intent this time. And then next time you do a little bit more and then a little bit more. You're actually acting, but time's being stretched. And we always want to dam our limits. Like, why do I have this limit on me? But Saturn's actually asking us to become responsible for our limits. But when these shadows are integrated, we get some great qualities out of this placement, believe it or not. And I'm going to frame that in terms of the life lessons that this placement offers, the takeaways that we can have. And I'm going to take a tiny short break. It'll be 0 time for you guys. I'll be right back. All right, guys, I'm back to our malefic party. But beyond all jokes, this is actually an opportunity to learn lessons of self-mastery and what it means to have endurance. Wherever Saturn goes, like look at the sign of Aries in that part of your chart. Which house is it sitting in? It's giving us a particular kind of self-mastery and endurance in that domain. And what I mean by that is that Saturn's going to refine our actions because it stays there for such a long time, which is giving us a sense of endurance. And Saturn's cultivating a lot of discernment here. It's giving us the ability to see which actions deserve their continuation and which ones need to be released. In many ways, is testing our capacity over and over, which is allowing us to see our own willingness, our own will to stay present, even when there's a lot of pressure. It's giving us a sense of self-trust that regardless of prolonged difficulties, we can stay, we can act in proportion, and that clarity will always come, but we just have to be patient. We're learning where our actions align. We're starting to recognize the structures of our lives. We're seeing what things work, what doesn't. And most importantly, we're getting to see ourselves. What Saturn's going to do after 2 years is going to show us what it means to have our actions be a reflection of ourselves, the reflection of our nature, rather than just impulsively acting because that's the condition of life, because someone told me to. Because they hijacked my entire being to act a certain way. And Saturn's constantly going to slow our progress. But this makes alignment unavoidable because we get to a certain point where like, this is not working. I need to do things differently. And all the delays that Saturn's going to bring about, it's going to make us examine our motivation. Like, what's motivating this action? Why do I feel so compelled to always act, to always react in this situation? So with Saturn here, a lot of our ineffective methods are going to lose their momentum. They're just going to exhaust themselves because they're exhausting us. What's going to remain are the actions that can be repeated, actions that match intent and expectation. Like, one of the things that Saturn in the sign of Aries can do, it can actually show you your vocation in life. And not through aspiration, because I just have this calling, but through sustained contact with reality. And I say this because true vocation comes from you understanding what you're made of. That's determining your vocation. And we have to remember, no matter how strong Saturn is, Saturn cannot and will not destroy your soul's mandate, but it will destroy all the bells and whistles that are around it. Like all the repetition that Saturn's going to create, everything and anything that is not of your true self, your individual self, of your potential, the pressure of Saturn's going to destroy it. So it's kind of like getting rid of all the excess so you get to the essence of who and what you're about. So Saturn's showing you what you're made of. And if we can see what we're made of, we can build our life around that. Our actions become productive actions. They become life-sustaining, life-supporting. We become proactive rather than reactive. In many ways, Saturn, I've said this in other videos too, in particular, the last video about people who have Moon in Aries and Saturn coming there, Saturn can align us back to our Dharma. And Dharma is not about your beliefs and your identity the way that it's been constructed circumstantially. It's the functional truth of your soul, the essence, the core of being, what you're made of, what you're about, which determines why you exist, what is the purpose of your life. And Saturn can show us this because it shows us which actions strengthen your coherence and which ones are actually weakening you and your life. It's showing us which commitments stabilize us and which ones are depleting us. Because sometimes we think we're committed to a certain thing in life, but if we dig deep, it's not the commitment of our soul, it's circumstantial commitment. It's performance of commitment. There's a lot of self-violation in that process. But if you understand the essence of you, you're not violating yourself. And if you're not violating yourself, rest assured, you don't violate other people. You violate other people because you don't understand yourself yet and how it is that you need to act, when you need to say no. Hostility and resentment builds up that way. And then we violate other people. And we have to remember Saturn here is actually a very good remedy for the things that just have been habituated in us and we just react. Because we're going to see how they don't work anymore. And because Saturn stays there for so long, we're going to modify those habits. And because there's so much repetition by the time Saturn leaves, a lot of the things that we're going to start doing is just going to feel natural to us because of that repetition. So discipline just integrates into our being. Things that we have to consciously choose at the beginning become our instinct by the time Saturn's leaving. Saturn's going to be exposing our shortcoming to us slowly and persistently over time because they're going to keep coming up and we're going to correct them over and over until a new sense of alignment is in place. So a lot of the learning will occur through repetition and reoccurrence. And if you think about it, I was saying earlier, Saturn indirectly gives strength back to the sign of Aries, and Saturn's also bringing resiliency. Because think about how many times we have to repeat, trial, error, fail, redo until we get it right. So it's bringing a form of resiliency into the sign, which is again augmenting its strength. And there's another side effect. So you've gone through everything, you've repeated, you have a new alignment. Now you can act and there's potency in your action by the time Saturn leaves. This will also augment our sense of self-confidence because you know how you act is effective in the world. It produces results. So Saturn in a lot of ways is creating a transmutation of Aries intensity to become about precision. And this is coming from the self, knowing its own limits, its strengths, what it can and can't do, when it should do it and when it should not do it. And think about this, when we understand all of these components, we also have a clear sense of direction. If we learn all the lessons Our actions are purposeful. Our effort becomes intelligent. And that means we know how to navigate through life through informed choices and corresponding actions. And while Saturn might feel like it's taking away our autonomy and our choice, while it starts in the sign of Aries, by the end, it can give us a sense that we have our autonomy back. It's showing us what it means to be self-possessed. And that's because all the patience and endurance that we learn, we're not reactive anymore. We respond to things consciously. And if you think about it, this is the process of becoming more mature. Saturn represents older ages, old age. It brings a sense of maturity to actions. And with this debilitation, this is hard earned, but it's lasting when it's all said and done. So lasting that it's supposed to carry us for another 28 and a half years of our lives. And now we're coming to the end of the video, but before closing, I want to ask you, please do remember to subscribe, share, and comment. I'd love to know what your mindset is, what your expectations are. What do you think you'll be grappling with from what you already know of yourself? And how do you feel about all of it? And we'll keep this dialogue open because, as I said, there will be a lot more videos coming out about Saturn in the sign of Aries. There's already that Moon in Aries video. In the playlist, there's Saturn's first ingress into Aries, which happened last spring. There will be a Saturn return video, and of course, all the transits. And all of them will have an article on the website, which goes deeper, and they always include self-reflection questions for you guys to do a self-inventory and to understand where you are and what's being demanded of you, what's there to learn. And if you guys want a reading of this transit or other transits, you can go to the email in the description box below, or you can just go to parisayazdi.com for more information. And now to close. So Saturn's going to start its journey in the sign of Aries, not in giving us resolutions, but it will start by exposing our weakness. And what's getting initiated now is going to continue under pressure. Saturn will be asking us to endure a lot. And one way to think about this is to think that you had a soul contract with yourself, but now you've lived for these many years. Life has made certain demands, so your actions are not necessarily all coming from the core essence of you. This is Saturn coming to edit. Saturn's coming to forcing us to shed certain things that are not our own anymore. And it's worth remembering, we're talking about Saturn, so that means this process is going to be slow. We have to understand that meaning and purpose, we have to give it time because it's going to unfold across time. And it's going to happen through repetition and consequences. And no one can rush Saturn, not even Aries. And the things that Saturn wants to teach us, they just can't be bypassed. It can't be softened without a cost. I mean, it's there for so long, it's just the cost of it is going to seep out in another place. And let's take out the element of surprise because Saturn never enters a sign just acting based on that sign. And I talk about that in that previous video about Saturn at 29 degrees of Pisces. Because Saturn's not arriving in the sign of Aries without history. We're not arriving to this moment without our own history. And that means what's going to unfold in the sign of Aries is carrying the weight of what came before it. It's coming from our past. And the point right now is to dismantle those parts. The parts that doesn't apply and correspond to our soul and to our nature, we're going to be shedding them in the next 2 years. So this is continuation of Saturn's story and our story, the long unraveling that has already started in the sign of Pisces. So if you want to know what Saturn's going to do in Aries, reflect back to the sign of Pisces. Don't look at it as a standalone placement. The transits are telling your story just like the way we have a life story. Like if you think about it, in the sign of Pisces, old structures of our lives that couldn't hold us in our environment, that were getting dissolved. Now in the sign of Aries, we actually have a rebuilding project, which requires a lot of actions, decision, and intent. But it can't be based on what has already been dissolved. This is why there's this push and there's this force to test what we're acting towards, how we're acting. We're supposed to perform actions that permits us to rebuild certain structures in our lives. And you know, what comes next now very much depends on the things that we have already confronted, what has already been endured, and what remains unfinished. And that's where the work continues, and Saturn represents work. And now, in concluding this video, I want you to remember Saturn in Aries doesn't want to tell you who you are. It wants to place you in motion, engaged with certain actions in a particular way so that you can discover this for yourself now, who you've become and who you can become. So welcome to that part of your journey, which is really about all of us understanding what we're made of, why we exist at all. Why has that potentiality that is the core of us has had the manifestation that it has had? And that's it for today. Sending you much love. Till next time.